Hi, I'm Scott from the Rio Grande Jewelry Tech team, and today I'm going to show you a method for making a four-prong head inside ZBrush. So let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be making a different style of setting. It's going to be a four-prong, and it's going to have a peg on the bottom. And I'll show you my reference material here. This is actually from our website, but this is what we're going to be making today. So it's going to be a bit of hard edge modeling. It's a very simple project, which only, once you have the process down, will only take a few minutes to make. But it's an interesting lesson in hard edge modeling. And one of the things I always find interesting about watching other people that use ZBrush is how they go about certain things, because with ZBrush, if there's one way to do it, there's probably multiple ways to do it. So I believe the way that I went about making this to be a rather unorthodox method, but I'll let you be the judge for that. We're basically going to be using the Gizmo and some masking brushes to make this entire piece. So the first thing I want to do is I want to bring out a subtool. So I'm going to bring out this Polymesh 3D star. So click on that, left click and drag, release, and immediately hit the T key to go into edit mode. And I'm going to go ahead and change to my dirty blue here. So since we're going to be making a setting, the first thing we need to do is bring in a stone. So I'm going to generate one with the ring utility plugin in my Z plugin menu. So if you don't have this installed, I do highly recommend it. You can download it from the Z plugin area at pixellogic.com, and will allow you to generate rings and gemstones. So in the gemstone submenu, we are going to generate a round stone. We're going to do about a 1 carat, which is about a 6.5. And I'm going to turn off on band since we don't have a ring to put this on. So go ahead and click Add Gemstone Subtool. And there we go. Now it should already be selected. I'm going to click and drag just to drag it up to the top of my list here. But the first thing I need to do is make sure that this is the right size. So we've labeled it as a 6.5 millimeter, but I want it to be a 6.5 in my scene. So with the stone selected, navigate to the geometry palette and go down to your size menu. And in the XYZ, I'm going to key in 6.5 and hit enter. So there we go. Now when I start taking measurements on this, it will measure out as 6.5. Actually changed a bit. Key that back in. There we go. So now I can start creating the setting for it. And I'm actually just going to use this star to begin with, because we're going to be using one of the primitives from the Gizmo. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Make sure that my stone is visible as well. And my star is pretty small at the moment, so I'm going to scale it up. So I'm going to click on the Move button to bring up my Gizmo, and just click and drag on this yellow box here just to kind of bring it up so I can see it a bit better. And now I can go in and generate my primitive. So at the top of the Gizmo, click on the Customize button, and we're going to be generating a polycube. So first thing we need to do with the polycube is we need to determine what size we want our prongs to be. Now this method I'm going to show you will result in a prong that's a few tenths of a millimeter larger. So whatever you want the prong to be, say you want to end up with a 1 millimeter prong, you need to size this cube to about 0.2 millimeters smaller than what you want the end result to be. So I'm going to shoot, since this is a 1 carat, I'm going to shoot for about a 1.2 to 1.3. That'll be pretty good. So back in the geometry palette, in the size menu under XYZ, I'm going to key in 1 millimeter, because I'm shooting for a 1.2 to 1.3, so I need to make it about 0.2 of a millimeter smaller. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on transparent mode just so you can see where that is. So that's all I need to do. I don't need to mess with any of the H divide or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go back into Customize and go back into the Gizmo. So next thing I need to do is I need to place this this box where the prong is going to be contacting the stone. So with this type of setting, there is room to, let me grab my reference material here. There is some room to actually bring these prongs in toward the stone and it still be just fine. So I'm not going to set the prongs to actually overlap the stone the way I normally would. I'm going to have it just kind of right here, right on the edge, and then whoever's doing the setting, if that's you or someone else, can adjust those prongs in and out as needed. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is I'm going to snap to the side view here. So next thing we need to do is we need to stretch this out a little bit. So I've got it lined up with my stone right where I want to, and now I'm going to use the scale and Y and just click and drag to kind of bring this out. And we're going to make it a bit taller than what we actually need. So something like that. There's some room to fudge in here, and there's actually not that many steps that we're going to be doing. So if you need to, if you get towards the end and you need to undo, you're only undoing a few steps that can be very quickly reproduced. So what I need to do is I need to rotate this so I'm creating this kind of inner line where the stone is. So on my reference material here, I need to get this angle in place. So if I just rotate this where it's at, you can see it's actually pulling the edge away from my stone. So I'm going to undo that. So we're going to change the pivot point. And we're going to do that by going to our Gizmo. Under this corner bit here, you'll see Move Screen or Alt to unlock. So I'm going to hold Alt to unlock the Gizmo. And I'm going to move my Gizmo right on that corner where the stone is contacting the prong. And now we've changed the pivot point of this, and I can actually go in and rotate it exactly where I want to. Now, I'll move that down just a bit. So when we're doing this, this is kind of the trickiest part, is knowing how to kind of get the angle just right. So really you're just going to be kind of ballparking it. You don't want this to be right up on the stone like this. You actually want some light to come through between that prong and that stone. But we also don't want it to be like this, because then we create a really tall setting. So I'm just going to eyeball it, probably something like that. We can make a few adjustments after the fact to make sure everything is going to look the way we want it. So I'm fine with that. So we're going to move on to the next step. So if I turn on polyframes, you can see I don't have much geometry here. On this part, we've only got about 98 points. So we need to add some geometry to it before we continue. So I'm going to go ahead and Dynamesh. So I'm going to navigate to the geometry palette, click on Dynamesh, and I'm just going to turn it on. I don't need to mess with any of the settings there. So if we turn polyframes back on, we should have a lot of geometry that we can play with, because we are going to do some clipping on this. So next thing we need to do is we need to reorient our Gizmo, because we're going to be chopping off this extra bit up here and this little corner down here. So at the top of my Gizmo, I'm going to hold Alt to unlock the Gizmo and click Reset Orientation. So there we go. Now our Gizmo is reoriented to the axes, and we can cut these off a little easier. So to clip these, I'm going to hold Control and do a scale and Y and just start clicking and dragging this down until it's about even with the girdle of the stone here. So I've got the top part clicked off. I'm going to keep holding control, and then I'm going to drag up to do this bottom part down here, just until I get those clipped off and we get a flat edge here and a flat edge here. Now, one thing you may have already noticed is that when you do that, you get these little bits that kind of appear on the side. Not a big deal. We can actually just clip those off real quick. So without doing anything to my gizmo, I can actually clip in the x-axis. So hold control, and on this red box, click and drag, and I'm just going to kind of clean that up a bit. And I got a little bit of one down here, so I'm going to do it the same way in the other direction and just clean that up a bit. So there we go. Now we're moving along. So the next part we're going to do, I'm going to grab my reference material here. So the next part we're going to do is this square part up here. So the way we're going to do that is we are going to mask off everything on this except for this top area up here. And I'm going to turn off my gizmo just to kind of get it out of the way. And I'm also going to turn on polyframes so I can do this a little easier. So we're going to zoom in here, and to bring up my masking brushes, I'm going to hold control, and the mask pen is good. We don't need to change that. But under freehand, I do want to change this to drag rect. So instead of just freehanding a mask, we're going to be dragging out a rectangle. And I'll show you a quick little trick as well. So if you hold control and drag out your box here, and now I'm continuing to hold control and left click. If I press and hold spacebar, now I can move this box around, and I want to get it pretty close to this edge up here, something like that. So it doesn't matter that I have a bit of irregularity up here at the top. That doesn't matter at all. The biggest thing is just that we don't mask off this top area. We want to leave that unmasked. So now I can zoom out, draw a big rectangle, and mask off everything else. So there we go. Now we've got this top section that's unmasked, everything else is masked, and we can go back to our gizmo. So I click on the Move tool to bring that back up, and I'm going to center it on this top surface by clicking Go to Unmasked Mesh Center. So go ahead and click on that, and now we've centered that gizmo right on the center of that surface. And now I can just move in the Y direction and actually extrude this out. So when you extrude these out, the prong is probably going to come around 40, 50, 60% up the stone. That's relatively normal depending on the type of setting you're doing, probably closer to about 40 or 50%. I always say it's better to have a bit too much metal on top of the prong than too little, because the person setting it can always bring down the height of this prong, or after it's set, actually shape the prong on top of the stone to make it look the way they want to. But they do need enough metal to do that. So you don't have to go crazy with it, but you do want to have a bit more metal than is necessary to set the stone. So that's actually looking just fine. I'm happy with that. So now I can, off to the side, I can hold control, click and drag to clear my mask. And because we've stretched out all these polygons here, I'm going to re-dynamesh by holding control, click and drag, and now we have a fresh mesh there. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to create a bit of a taper on this area. Let me grab the reference material. So you can see that this line right here and this line right here are not parallel. There's actually a bit of a taper there. So when I was making this the first time, I did experiment with making this tapered at the very beginning. Controlling the size and dimensions of your prong become a little bit trickier. This was kind of the way I'm going to demonstrate is kind of a quick way to make sure you don't have to worry about changing the size of your prong too much. So we need to do some masking. So I'm going to go back into draw mode just to turn the gizmo off. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off this top area. So if I hold Control, we still have drag rect activated. So just click and drag, and I'm going to drag it right to about that corner right there, right in the middle of the girdle. And the next part, I need to mask off this side as well, because we don't want this gap right here to change, but we do want to bring this outer wall out a little bit. So I'm going to mask with the lasso. So I'm going to hold Control, go back into the stroke modifiers, and click on lasso. So with lasso, I can do a more freeform mask. And I'm going to start kind of in the middle of the prong. So I'm holding Control, left click and drag, and I'm just kind of dragging down the center like that. And don't worry if it's not straight, that doesn't matter at all. We just need this inside wall to be masked. It doesn't really matter what we have on the side. That right there will actually be sufficient. So now I can bring my gizmo back up, and I'm going to go ahead and change the pivot point one more time, because right now this area is unmasked, so we need to bring this out. We're actually going to do that just by rotating the gizmo, as long as we have the gizmo in the right spot. So I'll show you what that looks like. So on this corner bit here, I'm going to hold Alt to unlock, and then I'm going to put the center of the gizmo right on that outside corner. So now when we grab this outer circle and rotate, we actually bring this out a little bit. And the amount of taper will mainly be up to you. We can take a look at our reference material again and just kind of eyeball it just to make sure that it's going to look similar. But what we have right here is pretty close, and I can make little adjustments as needed. But that's pretty good right there. Just the slightest amount of taper. So now I can clear my mask. So hold Control, click and drag off to the side. And because we've stretched our polygons again, we need to redynamesh. So hold Control, click and drag off to the side, and there we go. So last thing we need to do is, because we rotated this, we kind of messed up our bottom angle here, so we're going to clean that up. Now I did rotate the gizmo when I was making this, so I need to reset the orientation. So hold Alt to unlock the gizmo and click Reset Orientation. And now I can hold Control to clip and do a scale and Y by dragging up. So something like that. So that's pretty good. That's our prong right there. One thing we need to do before we start making more of these is we need to check our measurements. So remember when I said at the beginning that this process was going to take our prong and make it about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters larger than what we set it at. So I set this one at 1 millimeter. So let's go ahead and take a quick measurement. So I've still got the gizmo on. I'm going to go up here to the top and turn off the gizmo so we can get back to the old transpose tool. And I'm going to aim it right here on this corner. Left click and drag. I'm holding Shift, and I'm going to aim it right to this other corner here. So our measurement is 1.2 millimeters thick. And that's a good start. Now, one thing you'll notice is that this is more of a rectangle right now. This is 1.2 millimeters in this dimension, but it's still 1 millimeter in this dimension. If you want to make that a bit more squarish, this would be the time to do it. Or if you want to leave it that way, that's perfectly fine as well. It gives you a bit of extra thickness on the backside where all the tool marks are going to occur when you're setting the stone. So totally up to you. I'm going to go ahead and just square this off a bit. So go back up to the top and turn my gizmo back on. And I'm going to go back to unmasked mesh center just to kind of get it in the center of the model. And now I can do a scale in Z to kind of bring that up and make it a bit more squarish. So something like that. So it's perfectly up to you. It kind of depends on the setter and how you like to do things when it comes to how thick to make these prongs. So yeah, that's perfectly up to you on how you want to do it. Now, since I have stretched it a bit, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly redynamesh. So Control, click and drag off to the side. And now we're ready to make the other ones. So I'm going to turn off the gizmo so we can see this a little better, and we're going to mirror this to the other side. So under the geometry palette, I'm going to go to modify topology, and in there is a command called mirror and weld, and we want to do our first mirror and weld on the x-axis. So go ahead and click that, and now I've made a prong on the opposite side, and it's already kind of welded them together. Now the way I'm going to do the other two prongs, a slightly different method. I'm going to go into the subtool palette, make sure that I've got those prongs selected, and I'm going to click duplicate to make another set. And now I'm going to snap to my top orthographic view, so hold shift, and now I can bring the gizmo back up. Click on go to unmasked mesh center, so it'll put my gizmo right in the center there. And then just rotate this group, holding shift, so it'll snap to 90 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off ghost mode because at this point we don't really need it. Oh, there we go. So yeah, so one thing you want to check when you do this is the amount of overlap. So I kind of shot for what we had in the picture here. If you want yours a little lower, not so tall, that's perfectly fine. How much you have this overlapping is more of a design consideration. So that's completely up to you. And it would just be adjusting that angle when we rotated this piece the first time. You would just adjust that angle a little bit, and that will take care of that. So next thing we need to do is, right now these are two separate subtools, so we need to dynamesh those two together. So I'm going to go ahead and select the top one, and I'm going to merge these two together. So make sure you have the top one selected, go to merge and click merge down, and just go ahead and click OK. And now once those are merged, I can redynamesh. So hold Control, click and drag, and now we've dynameshed these two together. Okay, so the next thing we want to check is we want to check the depth, because when we first made this, we couldn't be necessarily sure how much visibility we were going to have of the stone or how tall it was going to be, but there is a way where you can make some quick adjustments. So I'm going to turn off the gizmo just so we can see. If I want to make this setting a little taller, bring it off the stone a little bit, there's a quick way of doing that. So I'm going to mask this top section up here down to the girdle. So hold Control, and I'm going to go into my stroke modifiers and do a drag rect. And now I can hold Control, click and drag, and I want to bring that bottom edge of the mask right to that corner there. And now go ahead and bring the gizmo back up, so click on the Move button. And I want to bring the center of this gizmo right in here right to the base of this mask. So I'm going to hold Alt to unlock the gizmo and use the move and Y to kind of bring this up just until that center is right along that mask. Now you can see just by checking the top, my gizmo was not completely centered in my model here, so I do need to do that. So make sure to go to unmasked mesh center, and then do your Alt to unlock and move in Y, so it's right in the center where you need it. That's good. So now once we have that, I can do a scale in Y and just very gently kind of pull this up or down. And all it's going to be doing is adjusting this distance here a little bit and kind of opening that up a little bit. Ideally with a stone, you would like to see the culet. That's kind of a common way of setting these up. So something like that is perfectly fine. And again, it kind of comes down to a design consideration and how you want the finished piece to look. So that's just fine right there. So I go ahead and clear my mask. And if you need to, if you dragged it a long way, you'll probably want to redynamesh. Just depends on how you did it. And the last thing we're going to do is we are going to bring in our peg. So for this, I'm just going to append in a primitive. So in the subtool menu, click on Append, and we're going to do a cube. So brought in my cube, make sure that it's selected, and I'm just going to drag it kind of down here where I can see it a bit better. So we'll snap to the bottom orthographic view, and I'm just going to do the scale in X, Y, and Z to kind of get this about the right size. So something like that. You don't have to be exact with this because this peg is just for when you drill into the piece that you're putting this head on, you'll drill a hole, put this peg down in there, and then solder it or weld it into place. So this just makes sure that everything's going to be nice and straight. And if you are adding this in your CAD design, you can actually kind of plan for this peg ahead of time, and if you need to do any polishing in areas that are hard to reach. So once you have this head installed, areas around the base of the head can get a little difficult to polish. Completely up to you. So yeah, got that sized the way I want to. I'm just going to go ahead and scale it and add it in something like that. That actually looks a little too big. I'm going to do a scale in X, Y, and Z. There we go. Another thing that's more of a, you can do this if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and hide my stone. So right now on the interior, let me get rid of the gizmo so you can see it. We have this kind of sharp corner down here in the bottom. So you can actually use the peg to take care of that. So if I scale this up in the Y direction and kind of bring that up something like that, you can actually get rid of that sharp corner. Corners like that can cause issues with casting. So if you have a flat spot on the bottom, chances are it's going to cast a little better. So I think I could probably scale that down in the Y a bit and just make a few minute adjustments. It went a bit too far. So yeah, something like that. That looks pretty good. So we got a little flat spot in there, and we got our peg on the bottom. So bring my stone back in, turn off the gizmo, and now we're looking pretty good. So the one last thing that, we need to dynamesh. So let's make sure that we got our head selected. Let's merge the peg in. So do a merge down, click OK, and then re-Dynamesh. There we go. Now we've got them all Dynamesh together. So the one last thing that I would recommend is that we've made this head, and right now it's pretty high poly. So it's about 714,000 active points. So that's pretty high poly for something like a head, which really doesn't need that kind of high resolution. If you're going to be doing some sculpting on this, then you might actually want that. But if you're just using this as kind of a standard head, then it's best to bring the poly count down. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. And I'm going to ZRemesh it. So go into the geometry palette and go to ZRemesher. And I don't think we need to adjust anything. We'll check after it runs, but just go ahead and click ZRemesher, and we'll go ahead and let that run. Should only take a few seconds. Okay, so there we go. Now, it didn't change too much. We're down to about 15,000, so that's much more manageable. Got a bit of weirdness here in the corners that I could probably go in and smooth out. In fact, why don't we undo that real quick, and let's do the target poly count. Let's bring that up to 15, and then we'll ZRemesh again. In all likelihood, that wouldn't cause a major issue because this stone is blown up, but it's only 6.5 millimeters across, and this head is going to get pre-polished and set and cleaned up. So yeah, it's still got a little bit, but we're talking tenths of a millimeter, and those will get cleaned up. If you really want to clean those up as best you can go ahead and kind of smooth out this little junction here. It's kind of a sharp corner in the Dynamesh, so just kind of smooth that out a little bit, and that will take care of that. So now we've got a much more low poly model. I'll go ahead and turn on poly frames for this. So nice even geometry, and what you can save this as a Z tool. So once you're done, save the head up here, and you can bring this into subsequent models. And we've got a nice even geometry now, so when you start adding subdivisions to it, you will be able to sculpt on it and change it however you see fit. But when you're doing this method to create this head, typically it only takes a few minutes to throw this together, and it came out pretty close to what we had. There we go. So yeah, not too bad, and you can always just kind of play with the adjustments on how far you bring this little taper out. There's endless room to play when you're doing this. So yeah, that's kind of a quick and dirty way of making this style of 4-prong head with a peg, and I hope you enjoyed the video.